Hello and welcome back, or possibly for the first time, to The Movie Trap. I am one of your three hosts, Zach Powers. I am joined, as I always am, by Chris Boruff.
Howdy.
And Russell Carlsen.
Hello, hello, hello.
And this time we have a very special guest. It is Russell's twin brothers, so if you're listening to this in audio format, good fucking luck telling them apart. It is Richard Carlsen joining us this time.
If they move, kill him.
It's gonna be a real prestige on your ears today.
Yeah, I had to bring in Richard because I'm not gonna lie, he was sort of the impetus for this theme.
Don't put this on me.
Yeah,
I advised you against this. Don't put this on me.
Well, you're the one who said I should pick the Wild Bunch. So the premise of the podcast is one of us picks a theme, and then each one of the hosts picks a movie based on that theme. At the end of the 3 rounds, we will vote with our allocated 10 points on which was the best for whatever reason we want to come up with. And whoever wins picks the next theme.
And if you are joining us for the first time, you've chosen a good episode to do so, because this is the first in
Indeed.
a round of 3.
Indeed.
This one picked by Russell himself. Russell, what was the theme you picked?
The theme was acclaimed American filmmaker Sam Peckinpah. And the movie I chose, because I'm a huge asshole, was arguably his best movie,
Not arguably.
The Wild Bunch.
I'd suggest that the true theme this time is that Russell really likes to win.
Yeah, I think Russell is the first. He is the first bad. This is like the beginning of the end of the democracy, where Russell can now just go.
Or he's never letting it go.
You know,
Bad faith pick like narrow categories. Choose the clear winner, clear best one, and constantly retain power.
He's not to the point of Caligula, but he's definitely a Nero. There's something going on with this.
Yeah.
If it makes you feel any better, like Pike in this movie, even though it was a dastardly heist, I still feel hollow and empty and devoid of any human satisfaction. So if that is any consolation,
No, I did do my we'll get to our picks at the end, but I did my research, and there's not 100% consensus that this is his best movie. So, you know, I tried to pick something that seemed like it could give you at least a run for your money, but we'll see how it goes.
Excellent.
We'll save that to the end.
Like I said, I am not my brother. The reason why I brought Richard on here is because he's much more of a Peckinpah enthusiast than I am, and I'm not as well versed with Sam Peckinpah as he is, so that's sort of the reason why I want to do this, because I'll be going into a lot of these movies blind as well. So
yeah,
I'm kind of having fun with it on that respect.
I want to briefly say, first and foremost, during the course of this episode, you may hear occasionally one of us saying you get a point for that or something along those lines. Each of us has a well of 3 points that we can dish out to whomever we want for whatever reason we want over the course of these 3 rounds. Richard, as our guest, I think it's customary that you also get 3 points if you want to deliver any points.
Oh, that's
in the
awful
course of
decent
this.
of you. I was planning on just being out of it and just letting you guys fight amongst each other.
Yeah.
I think that I introduced breaking that rule pretty hard, so we're just rolling with it.
I believe that's what we did with Brian Flynn. It feels like it's nice to give the guest a little something to contribute for the...
Sure. Yeah, and if time allows, I think Richard wants to do the whole Peckinpah round, so he might be with us through the bitter end.
Yeah, I don't trust you guys to talk about Peckinpah without me.
Okay,
Sorry.
well, if that happens, maybe save some of your points, because you're not going to get more next time.
You got it.
It'll be 3 for the whole round, but you'll be allowed to vote at the end.
So anyway, yeah, the theme is Sam Peckinpah. This movie is 1969's The Wild Bunch. It stars William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Edmund O'Brien, and Robert Ryan. Zach, why don't you go ahead and summarize? This is actually a pretty long movie to plot out too, because I think this is the longest movie we've done thus far.
It is the longest movie we've watched for this show so far. It's nearly 2.5 hours. So I'll run through the plot with a fair bit of speed. I might omit minor details here and there in the interest of time. But the film opens in 1913, which is interesting for a Western. I mean, this is a year before World War I. It's the tail end of the Wild West era. By some metrics, it's after the Wild West era has more or less ended. And we're introduced fairly immediately to a group of aging outlaws, or at least the folks running the show are showing their age quite a bit. Planning a heist of a railway station that supposedly has some silver in a small western town. They surreptitiously invade the railway station in disguise as military men and take people hostage, but it's quickly revealed that they are being watched by a group of bounty hunters who are set on waylaying their nefarious scheme. Pretty quickly, what happens is it devolves into a shootout after the outlaws try to get away during a temperance parade. Doesn't work. There's a massive shootout. Several of the outlaws die, a couple of the bounty hunters die, and numerous civilians are also killed in the carnage. But most of the Wild Bunch, as we'll call them, manage to escape. At this point, we kind of get to know a few of the Wild Bunch characters. The leader of the outfit is Willem Holden as Pike Bishop, who's an aging outlaw. He wanted this to be his one last score before he got out of the game, but of course, didn't quite work out. He's got his long-term friend, Dutch, played by Ernest Borgnine, and of course, they got Lyle and Tector Gorch as
Gorch
sort
brothers.
of the sort of the comedic relief. Lyle in particular.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Comedy in this movie is very strange, but we'll get into that later. It is very strange.
Yeah. We'll have to talk about some of the comedy scenes.
Yeah.
And a Mexican man named Angel is also in the group. Well, interesting, Lyle and Tector Gorch, I didn't know this was a reference to this movie. There is an episode of Buffy where she fights a couple cowboy vampires named Lyle and Tector Gorch.
Love interest name of Angel, too.
Warren Oates and Ben Johnson, too, who are two Peckinpah players, and they're brilliant in it. Warren Oates, I'm becoming such a fan of Warren Oates, and I want to start digging into his filmography, because he's actually really, really good.
Yeah. Well, it's quickly revealed that the leader of the bounty hunters is a man named Deke Thornton, who used to work with Pike Bishop as his partner some years ago before being arrested, and he has been taken out of prison on the contingency that he basically catch Pike and the rest of the bunch, and then he will be given his freedom. If he fails to do so, within 30 days at this point, he will be sent back to prison. He's kind of being handled by this very corrupt railway man who clearly doesn't give a shit about the loss of human life. He just wants to catch these robbers. Probably
Complete fantasy.
Yeah.
Total fantasy.
That was that guy was played, I believe, by Edmund O'Brien. That was his.
No, Edmund O'Brien
was
the old man Sykes, was the older
Sykes?
guy who they meet up with later.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Never mind. I got it wrong. Well, I just remember that was one of the details. Like, it was Albert Decker. That's who it was.
Yeah,
who
Albert
played
Decker,
Harrigan.
yeah.
Albert Decker.
He
played
passed
Harrington.
away
Mr.
just a
Harrigan,
couple months after this.
Yeah. This was his last movie.
So the Wild Bunch elects to get out of town, head down to Mexico, and sort of figure out where to go from there. On the way, they meet up with the aforementioned Freddie Sykes, friend of Pike's, who's played by, who is it? Edmund O'Brien, as we mentioned. Sort of an old, crazy man. And they head down to Angel's hometown. And we find that it's the middle of the Mexican Revolution. This town is being squeezed by the federales trying to stop Pancho Villa.
By Mapache.
Mapache
Mapache is the general.
Mapache, the bad guy.
Mapache is the general, yes.
Pancho Villa is the revolutionary.
He does not appear in this film, but
No.
they eventually make their way to the general of the federales, the aforementioned Mapache, who is they figure they can maybe make a deal with him to get some money. Things go slightly awry early on when Angel sees that his former girlfriend is now with Mapache. He loses his temper and shoots his girlfriend while Mapache is literally holding her in his lap. They manage to smooth over the situation and say that, all right, you can work with us. We will basically steal a bunch of American weaponry for you to help give you the edge in this war, because they're kind of sweating it against the revolutionaries at this point. They strike a deal to do so, all the while Deke is on their tail trying to chase him down to Mexico. So they cook up this scheme where they find the train that is transporting all the weaponry. And so they have a plan to detach some of the cars holding all the troops and run away with the actual weaponry, unload it onto a carriage, and send the trains back to the cars carrying the troops, the American troops. And it goes okay at first. They are not detected for a little while, but Deke eventually notices something is wrong, and he and his men come after them on horseback. A horse-based chase ensues, and ultimately the Wild Bunch escape when they blow up a bridge, preventing Deke and the American soldiers from following them any further.
Can't have a Western without blowing up a bridge.
Yeah,
just part of the deal.
Also, I just wanted to one thing in there real quick. When he kills his girlfriend, who's now sitting on Mapache's lap, that scene ends with a big uproarious laugh. Just an important thing to point out. The entire Mexican army starts laughing that he just murdered a woman sitting on the other man's lap. Just a very strange moment.
Mapache.
Yeah.
They think that he was trying to kill Mapache at first, and then he says, no, he was just trying to kill her, and everybody has
That's it. We did that last week. It was hysterical.
Yeah. Angel has, unbeknownst to the rest of the Wild Bunch, agreed to siphon off some of the weapons, basically, and give them to a few revolutionaries who will protect his hometown from the Federales. Ultimately, Pike sort of accepts this. I think Angel forfeits his part of the bounty.
They agreed to it in the sauna. They said, it was the only way Angel would agree to work for Mapache.
Right, yeah.
Is that they said, all right, well, we're getting 13 crates. What if we just bring back 12?
Yeah.
You know, and so that was the only way Angel went wrong with it.
So they have 12 crates of rifles, some grenades, and a machine gun with infinite ammo.
It
is a Western after all.
Yeah. So they meet up with some of Mapache's troops, but immediately it's clear that these groups do not trust each other. The Wild Bunch has rigged up the car to explode and set up the machine gun in case they get double-crossed by Mapache's people. They manage to get back to Mapache, and it seems like everything's going to plan, but it turns out Mapache has figured out that some of these weapons have ended up in the hands of revolutionaries, and puts together pretty quickly because of the village that Angel is probably to blame. And so during the gradual transition of the weapons, Mapache takes Angel as a prisoner, sending Ernest Borgnine back to give them the news. About the same time, Sykes, while rustling up some horses, is shot in the leg by Deke Thornton's people and has to flee into the mountains. And the rest of the Wild Bunch heads back to Mapache, and with the mind to get Angel back. They find he's being tortured. He's being dragged behind Mapache's car, and is, dying of dehydration and torture by being dragged and things like that. So after a bit of revelry,
there's a lot of revelry in this movie.
It's a lot of drinking.
Yeah.
For a movie with a lot of stuff happening, there is a whole lot of just hanging out with the boys, tying one on. It's a little strange.
Music and just chilling out.
After a bit of revelry, they approach Mapache again, demanding Angel back. It appears Mapache might agree and give back Angel, but at the last minute slits his throat instead, at which point the Wild Bunch immediately riddles him with bullets. And for a moment, everyone is still unsure of what to do. The Wild Bunch realizes, okay, we're in the shit now. they kill this German advisor who had been working with Mapache.
I love that. That's a great bit of history that like there's this random guy who works for the Kaiser is just like hanging out there and trying to beat back this revolution.
Imperialism, man. It was everywhere.
It was like still the rage.
Cancer,
A massive gunfight ensues where the Wild Bunch manages to kill basically this entire fort of Federales, mostly using the aforementioned machine gun. But in the process, each and every one of them is killed as well. It seems like there's almost no survivors to this rampage.
Yeah.
Later, Deke shows up, and his scummy band of bounty hunters, his amoral bounty hunters, are happy to finally have the bodies they could take back for their bounty. Deke lets them go and stays behind, seemingly knowing that they'll probably be ambushed by the revolutionaries whom Sykes has now joined on their way back. Sykes and Thornton meet up, and Sykes offers to let Thornton join the revolution with him. He agrees to do so, and they head off, Sykes laughing madly as the movie ends.
It ain't what it used to be, but it'll do.
And that's more or less the rundown of the Wild Bunch.
That summary just makes me want to watch it again.
This is Richard. I think has seen this movie no less than north of 10 times. I think it's definitely one of his favorites.
Yeah, I can watch it anytime at any point. If it's on like TCM or something, it doesn't matter the point of it. I'll probably stick it through.
It is strange because like this is the second movie that I've chosen that John Wayne hated, so I'm okay with that.
John Wayne did hate this.
John Wayne hated this movie. He said it killed the American Western.
Kingsmen? Was that
All the Kingsmen? Yeah, he hated that one too, because of all the Tommy shit.
So Russell, your play was just to throw as much shade into John Wayne as possible.
It's a lifelong goal.
Well, old Marion.
I mean, it's not a nostalgic movie, so that's probably the reason John Wayne didn't like it. It went against what his whole brand was. His whole brand was, isn't America great? Wasn't America always great? Not, hey, isn't America kind of fucked? Wasn't it always kind of fucked? He has a problem doing that.
Far more in the vein of the kind of Western you'd see from a Sergio Leone, where it's a bunch of violent men in violent times, and it's not really like as romanticized. Like you'll get the backdrop of the Civil War and things like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the Mexican Revolution here. It's not so much in the vein of those John Wayne, like the nobility of the cowboy,
the lone man. Yeah, right. Yeah, there's this kind of rugged individualism that's celebrated and romanticized in westerns. Not that I kind of push back that this movie isn't nostalgic because all of these characters are from a bygone era at the time of this movie. So there is this sort of kind of whimsy about the way things used to be.
The thing is I'll say that it's. I would say that it's not nostalgic in the same way then. Like it does remember those characters. Sure. However, we watched like Once Upon a Time in the West, right? And like we did that like all the way back on the other Film Concussion, or when it was Film Concussion. And the thing with that is that they had a lot of scenes that I think I vaguely remember talking about this, is that they had all these scenes that really fetishized the technology that they were using at the time. They wouldn't just have people wander into town and do their business. They would be like, oh, here's a cart, here's someone dealing with a horse, here's someone dealing with water. And there was all these things where it was really obsessed with like the whole setting the world up and kind of getting you into that. This one, it was just like the first thing you see is them getting into a gunfight and a whole bunch of temperance people dying. And it wasn't, the temperance thing kind of set up the time period, but the death was not what you really expected to see first thing going into like a Western.
I wanted to talk about because in that opening scene, because there's a lot of cuts in this movie. This movie is very frantic.
He took the French. I mean, that's one of the reasons why it kind of because this movie wasn't a huge hit in America per se. Not until they had like a limited release, but it was really big in Europe, and that was mostly because Sam Peckinpah was using those French New Wave editing techniques. I mean, Sam Peckinpah was as involved in the editing room as anyone.
Yeah.
And that sort of quick cut, especially quick cut to regular speed to varying the speeds that you're cutting in between.
And I'd say right off the bat, I know Russell wants to talk about this guy holding hostages in the station, I believe. But
Bo Hopkins.
Yeah, but I also want to say in the opening credits, as early as the opening credits, which I actually enjoyed a lot. I really liked that technique of the freeze frame, and it kind of becomes like a
fucking
portrait.
badass.
And they have this image that is at the beginning and end of the opening of these kids watching ants eat a scorpion, and then they eventually put some brush on it with the intention of setting it on fire.
Right, and it creates like a beautiful metaphor of what the film's actually going to be about. And apparently that idea came from the actor who plays Mapache. The actor who plays Mapache is actually was actually a pretty well-known Mexican writer-director in Mexico. And he is, apparently his personality is exactly what you see as Mapache. It was like, I mean, it was, you know, drinking and whatever. And of course, so Sam Peckinpah, of course, got along famously with the guy. And he said, oh yeah, you know, when we were kids, we used to do that. And Sam Peckinpah's like, because Sam Peckinpah was not a guy who was famous for his pre-planning of shit. He would just kind of, if something felt right at the day, that's what was going to be shot. And apparently that whole segment of the scorpions on the ants, you know, because the image is you see a scorpion fighting its first life being swarmed by ants, and then what happens eventually? The kids just light everything on fire, you know. And it's like, you know, you can get in real heady about this, is that like the scorpions are the wild bunch, the ants are the soldiers, and the kids are the audience, because we're gonna light them all on fire.
That's fucking interesting to me, because it honestly, when you think of the way in this movie, the way Sam Peckinpah cuts back to things of nature, it reminds me of Werner Herzog. You know, Herzog would do that a lot, you know, like, and I've never considered that before, but that is so true, that like the way Herzog and Peckinpah intercut scenes of nature are not necessarily to make you feel good or how beautiful it is. It's usually something very ugly and something very violent.
Werner Herzog uses a similar technique.
Yeah. That's about nature. And then even the way that, like, at the end shot when it's Thornton waiting at the end, it's the only time where you see like weather happen. Like there's like this oncoming storm that's coming, and Thornton's just kind of this lonely character there, and it's sort of implying that there's this threshing maw of progress coming to devour everybody, and all you could do is just kind of either join with it or fight against it.
I think it's fair to say that so the use of technology in this film, I think there's two fairly prominent ones. One is Mapache's car, which is used to drag Angel. And I think the other real technological advantage, something they had never seen before, is the machine gun, which just mows people down, like, at the end. It's like the technology in this film is ultimately extremely destructive. It's the year before World War I, and the coming 20, you know.
It was unlike anything most Westerns had done before. You know, like you're looking at Pike. His main weapon is just like a 45 that I see like on The Wire. You know, like it's something that really hadn't really been done before. And you know, we're talking about that opening scene and essentially what. I just want to kind of think about what it must have been like for moviegoers to see that scene for the first time, to see because it's unapologetically brutal. I mean, even today, it's the whole marching across to sing, you know, "We Shall Gather at the River," the song that they use a lot in The Searchers, because fuck The Searchers.
Richard's favorite hobby horse to beat up on.
Well, I always told Russell, like, what Crash is to Boruff, The Searchers is for me. You know, like it is always considered the best Western. I think The Wild Bunch kicks the shit out of The Searchers in the Western department in just about every aspect of what you would require from a Western. It's not the best John Ford Western. It's not the best John Ford, John Wayne Western. I watched it again recently just to make sure I still hated it. And yep, it's true.
So what's the best one? Is it Stagecoach? What's the best John Wayne Stagecoach?
Sam Peckinpah's favorite. Sam Peckinpah, because he also thought The Searchers sucked shit. But Sam Peckinpah's favorite thought his best John Ford film was My Darling Clementine. That was the one he thought was the best one. My favorite is Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. I think that one fucking rules.
Also starring Strother Martin and.
Can we talk about that? I mean, like, there's so many character actors in there, especially Strother Martin.
Well, let me finish up. Let me just put a button on the beginning, just because you kind of brought up a nice visual of the first time seeing this movie in 1969. I mean, I think that's what too many of modern audiences I think will get lost on is the historical context of when this movie came out. 1969, there wasn't a lot of bloodshed in movies. The bloodshed you see today, if you watch it with modern eyes, it can seem quaint. The tension's there. You feel you're on the edge of your seat with it. But the violence itself isn't what necessarily jars you, as it did in 1969. Sure. Sorry, Zach, go for it.
I think, and additionally, like, the way the violence is, during that first scene, a lot of the violence is seen through the eyes of children. There's a lot of shots of children watching this violence happen. And in a connection to The Wire again, a few scenes later, children are pretending to do a shootout, having just seen like this horrific Main Street shootout where dozens of people were murdered, just immediately begin emulating it, which is similar to how Omar inspires kids in The Wire.
That's absolutely, Zach. And bonus point for you, sir. Because you made the Wire Peckinpah connection there. Because I mean, it is that to me, that opening shot. I mean, that sequence because of all that it's explaining and all that it showed, to me, that is like case in point to where I don't see how anyone could look at what Sam Peckinpah did with the Wild Bunch, when I'm talking the Wild Bunch, and call it gratuitous. Because he was trying to say something. I mean, like, all that violence and everything of that nature was trying to... It wasn't doing it just because he thought it'd be cool to see blood coming out of a guy for the first time. He was doing it because... He was trying to be. It was a catharsis. He was trying to show, this is what it looks like, folks. Are you sure you want it? And what the public told him was, yeah, we do. Yeah, some of that.
Yeah, I think this one definitely led to like the rise of the action films of the 80s with the sheer body counts. It's funny. It is really funny with this one when we're talking about the first time you've seen it or the first time people saw this. The first time I saw this, it was 2002. I was in college in Chicago at the time. I took one semester up there, and it was in that dawning era before you could get anything. So you would hear about these movies, and then it was almost impossible to find them. So
I actually... Go ahead. I actually think this is an important point. I wanted to bring this up early in the episode. What is your history with Peckinpah, each of you individually? I think it might be useful for the audience to know how much experience we have with this director. Yeah. Since this is the first time we're talking about a single individual instead of a broad theme.
I'm really easy. My experience with Peckinpah is the Wild Bunch. Unlike Richard, who was right next door to me in college, he would, hole up in his room.
I lived in the same house.
Right, yeah. And he would watch. I remember there was a weekend he would just devour Peckinpah movies.
My experience was kind of different because, like I said, the first time I saw it was 2002. So I saw this one, and then I saw Straw Dogs. So it was like these two films, and then once I saw Straw Dogs, I was kind of like, I don't know if I really like this guy's stuff. So I didn't watch any of the stuff again ever since. I haven't seen another Sam Peckinpah in all the years since. So that's like 20 years ago and me seeing it again. I will say, since you guys were talking about the violence earlier, everybody told me how violent this movie was, but I had just seen a bunch of Takashi Miike films at the same time right before this. So when people were saying this was violent, I'm like, yeah, but everyone keeps their nipples in this movie. It's not that bad.
Briefly, I should say, my experience with Peckinpah is that in high school, probably, when I was a sophomore or junior, I saw Straw Dogs, and... I don't think, and I never watched I wasn't necessarily against watching another of his movies, but I was like, if this is the tone, it's just not a tone I'm in the mood for very often, and I never got around to watching another one.
Straw Dogs is like a rough intro to Peckinpah.
Well, it's weird how this guy, it's weird how this guy fits in, like, because this guy was working about the same time, I think, as Sam Fuller. So, like, you have these two guys who wrote really intense characters, but kind of a different take on it. Like, it seemed like Sam Fuller was a little more
Sam Peckinpah was considered, when the Wild Bunch came out, not even pre-Wild Bunch. I mean, you have to understand, Sam Peckinpah, when he made the Wild Bunch, okay, before he made the Wild Bunch, he was essentially blacklisted from Hollywood. Because he had made Ride the High Country, which was a huge hit. I mean, it was considered but the main reason it was a big hit is because Margaret O'Sullivan made sure of that. And it had Joel McCrea and Randy Scoff, and it was a really, really good film. But Sam Peckinpah, as if anyone who learns any sort of biography about him, his biography is Sam Peckinpah v. Producers. He never wanted anyone to tell him, but when he started coming out with especially after the Wild Bunch and everything of that nature, he was compared to Kubrick. I mean, people considered him as one of the up and comers. He was really considered to be one of the up and comers. That's what got him Major Dundee, and Major Dundee was ultimately one of the nails in his coffin in the '60s because he nuked everything, and it wasn't until he made this made-for-TV adaptation of a Catherine Porter film story called Noon Wine with Jason Robards and Olivia de Havilland that everyone kind of got onto it, and then they adapted this screenplay. Actually, I heard an interesting fact that apparently the idea for the Wild Bunch, Waylon Green, I think, I can't remember the
Waylon Green, that's his name.
Waylon Green was really good friends with this stunt actor who's also at the time known as the Marlboro Man. And the Marlboro Man went to Waylon Green and told him the story of these true-to-life characters and thought it'd be a really good idea for a movie. And the funny part is, at the same time, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid had just been purchased. Yeah, and it actually forced Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid to change their name from the Wild Bunch, because that was the name of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid gang, the Wild Bunch.
Right, but you were talking about the return of Peckinpah. Wild Bunch is kind of that, because I didn't know he was making the Cincinnati Kid. See, he got fired from that movie.
Yeah. Yep. He had been fired. He was originally hired, and he couldn't get along with producers, and it's a lot. I mean, he got no credit for anything and everything of that nature. He got a writing credit for this one, but this is an interesting kind of inside baseball thing. But in terms of the writers' union, in terms of this is around the same time where directors getting writing credit was a big point of contention for the Writers Guild at the time. And the screenwriter for, I think it was the Wild Bunch.
Was the Wild Bunch.
Yeah.
That's how he got nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah, and he said, he always thought, because the rule ended up being the director had to change certain percentage of the script in order to count for credit. And the screenwriter's see, that doesn't make any sense. A guy can come in and change a line and completely change the way the story is going to go. Does that mean he doesn't get even a credit for that? So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting thing, but they shopped this around, and it took them forever, but it was just one producer in who I can't remember the studio, but it was one producer that said, I want Peckinpah to make the Wild Bunch. It was after this Noon Wine thing.
I think it was MGM, but
MGM,
and so this is kind of his kind of return. So similar to kind of Color Out of Space, we're seeing this kind of pariah of Hollywood kind of emerge, coming back into it. And I think what's interesting about this movie is that Hollywood itself is starting to change. The industry itself is starting to, studio system is starting to crumble around them.
The Best Picture winner for the year that the Wild Bunch came out was Midnight Cowboy. I mean that's that's the sign of things that is going to happen.
Yeah, well, this is around the time that the flip for the auteur theory happened, right? With the French New Wave, and then everyone suddenly realized that Alfred Hitchcock was a big deal as opposed to just the guy who'd directed all those things. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, I have a question on this. Since you guys have, I think most of the people on this are a little bit more in the dark about Sam Peckinpah, but I do know about some of the influences he's had. For instance, on Mandalorian, season 1, when the big Gatling gun comes out. Outside of that, I'm not super familiar with references to Sam Peckinpah outside of hearing the names of his movies in connection with music and other things. So, what Tarantino films, would you say that's probably the biggest influence?
I would even say I don't know if Cormac McCarthy would admit this, but there's a lot of themes in Cormac McCarthy's literature that are very similar to the Wild Bunch.
I would have loved to see Peckinpah adapt a McCarthy novel.
McCarthy was a little later than Peckinpah was, but also, have you ever played that Red Dead Redemption 2 video game? Chris? Because that is very much like the Wild Bunch.
Not yet. It's the thing is that it much like a lot of things in my life, if it takes too long, I can't get into it. The fact that you got to get on a horse and it doesn't have a motor and you can't just rev the horse to go faster.
You got most of that game. You got to commit to that shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah. Every time Sarah would come out and watch me play that game, it was seeing the butt of a horse going ka-glump, 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 ka-glump. That's that game. And so I think the reason why Peckinpah matters, especially for the Western, I mean, he didn't only do Westerns, but that's what he's mostly known for, as I understand it. But I think when you watch the Wild Bunch, you could definitely see why his imprint is significant, because it not only the stripping away the romance of it, but also the characterizations of them. Like there's no real redeemable character in this movie.
But everyone blowjobs the Searchers for John Wayne being a racist prick for it and never paying for it ever. So he didn't kill his niece. What a fucking guy, whereas like Sam Peckinpah, his whole shtick, this is a theme for his movies, is he wants you to like people who are awful. Pike.
Does he want you to like them, though?
This is what I wanted to ask you. Yeah, because the good guy in the Wild Bunch is Deke Thornton. Like, that's the good guy is Deke Thornton, is that because Pike's an awful person. The whole crux of the story is Pike constantly coming to terms with going against what he claims is the most important, which is your word, which is your bond with your person,
with your comrades.
All we see throughout the movie is him going against that, leaving Bo Hopkins behind at the bank. He does it every single time, and it isn't until my absolute favorite scene in all of movies is when Ernie Borgnine, I call him Ernie, we're pals. When
he's dead now.
Yeah, I know. when he gave his word to a railroad. Talking about Deke Thornton, he said he gave his word to a railroad, and he says it's his word, and he just goes, that ain't what counts. It's who you give it to. Like that. That still sends me into fucking goosebumps, because I think at that moment, that's because I think a lot of, I don't know. I'm going to go off on a rant, but that moment just to me is an encapsulation of everything that Peckinpah is about, is that you're constantly seeing these awful people come to terms with their awfulness, and it ultimately pays for it.
I think that's fair too, because even Deke Thornton, one of the striking scenes in the movie is during the train heist when they send the engine, once they get the guns loaded off the train, they send the engine barreling down towards the rest of the train, presumably after their pursuers. Now, Deke Thornton already has a head start on the United States Army. And, he could have turned around and ridden back and maybe stopped the barreling train that's going to kill all these soldiers. But no, their singular purpose is going after Pike Bishop and his gang.
Even in the scene before that, when he notices, before the army does, that the trains have been decoupled, he looks around, he sees the commander of the unit is asleep, and he looks at the soldiers, and they're like 14-year-old kids. And he's
that
just
one kid just smiling,
and he's basically like, fuck this, I'm just taking my guys and leaving these, what he probably assumes are liabilities behind, because they're just going to drag him down, and he doesn't give a shit about them anyway.
Yeah.
Well, it's like a completely amoral world. Like, all the characters have the only thing we have approaching a moral compass is that one guy sticking by his word, and then it's just a constant challenge of how is he going to do it.
Even Deke's word is like, so he's got his comrades who are the other bounty hunters, who early in the movie we get a glimpse of them like arguing over who killed who and like having no regard for the carnage they've caused. They're terrible people, and at the end of the movie, he sends them on their way, seemingly aware that they're going to get ambushed and killed on the way back, and he just doesn't give a shit. And even then, he's like, my word was, I'd send them back. I did that. I'm fucking done. So, like, he fulfilled his obligation to the minorest degree and was like, that's it. I did it.
Even Pike tries to hedge it a little bit, where he said, look, I promised him boxes of guns. I said nothing about a machine gun, but I'll give it to you because I'm nice, and even that, like, I wanted to ask Richard, because he probably knows this. I mean, from what I understand, Sam Peckinpah was somewhat of a tyrant on set, and to the point to where the editor even noticed that William Holden playing Pike Bishop would pick up on Peckinpah's mannerisms, and that he played Pike like Peckinpah. That Peckinpah is Pike.
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of Sam Peckinpah's productions, The Wild Bunch actually ran relatively smoothly. Relatively, of course, for any Sam Peckinpah film.
Only 11 days over
but
schedule.
Sam Peckinpah was not a method director. Okay, he was not yes, and he directed Dustin Hoffman, like Mr. fucking Method, right? But he was a tyrant. He absolutely was. I mean, anyone who says, but it's a lot of times he would do that to kind of train these crew. His idea was, I'm going to break these people down and then rebuild them to work for me. You know, I mean, it's funny. He did that to get performances out of actors. He did that to make sure his crew got him exactly what he wanted, to the point where his little gang of misfits were able to anticipate what Sam was going to want and give it to him. So the point where that famous walk scene, that famous at the end where they're walking and it's just so fucking cool. I mean, in the script, it's just, Pike and gang walk to thing, but Sam Peckinpah one morning after his B-12 shot, said, he dreamed up this whole walk sequence and everyone put it together beautifully. It was completely made up right then and there that day. So, yeah, he did that, but he did that as, I think, a crew control method. I'm not condoning it, but that's just, what he did. And also, he was a massive alcoholic. I mean, he could not direct sober. Mm-hmm. Like, he couldn't. I mean, so it's that didn't help things, and it didn't help things that a lot of the other members of the Wild Bunch also, Bill Holden was no teetotaler,
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny you mentioned that. In preparation for this, I went out and I watched some interviews with people who were actually involved with the Wild Bunch, and one of them was a stunt coordinator.
Man. Who I think I saw that one.
Yeah, where the guy described being fired by Sam Peckinpah, where he, you've already heard this one, Richard, but what happened is that basically he didn't want to put on a fake beard because it was put on with some sort of cement that was like rubber cement or something that was really
it was just spirit gum. It was just spirit gum.
Where it's just screwing up his face. It looks stupid. The guy knew it looked stupid, and he knew he was a stunt coordinator, a stunt performer, and he just needed to get the job done. They weren't going to see his face. So he just wouldn't put it on. And eventually Sam Peckinpah fired the guy because he's like, if the guy's not going to do it, fuck him, get rid of him. So the guy comes around a rock, gets pissed off, starts yelling at Sam Peckinpah, while ripping this spirit gum beard off his face, saying, "You can fire me all you want, but get me a goddamn ride home right now." And he was not fired. The guy kept working on Sam Peckinpah movies consistently after that. And he said he only talked to Sam Peckinpah maybe 3 or 4 times privately outside of that.
Yeah, it's his own producer describes Sam Peckinpah, one of the things he liked to do to pass the time away was just throw knives at shit. They would, so to the point where the studios would just hey, do you got any sets with doors? Because this guy's just, so they would just bring old set doors and just sit there and throw a knife at him. And he'd do it in his office or whatever. And one time his producer tells a story of one time how they got in an argument and, some words were exchanged or whatever. And he was walking out of it and he could feel Sam throwing the knife. And this guy thought, what this guy thought? Not, holy shit, this guy just threw a knife at me. He thought, do not give this guy the satisfaction of having that knife land right next to me and going and luckily it just bing, doom, doom, tinked on the floor. And so he just picked it up and threw it back at Sam Peckinpah. See, Sam, some days you just can't do anything right. Yeah, it's. I think it's indicative of the time. It's indicative of the kind of guy that he was. I mean, Sam Peckinpah was a guy from the West, not the South. I mean, this is a Western guy. I mean, he comes from a family of lawyers. There's a fucking mountain named after his family, Mount Peckinpah. It's an actual thing that's named after his family. Comes from a family of lawyers and judges. And so he just had this kind of, I don't know, this kind of rugged Western kind of
it's funny that he's such it sounds like he's such a cliche of that romanticized John Wayne type of character, but most of his Western, or at least the Wild Bunch that I've seen now, is such a kind of throwing dust in the face of that, because I think that, I think there's a tendency for film directors, and it's too easy to lead into, to become sort of a petty tyrant to run your sets, and that's how you feel like that's how your set's going to run as a well-oiled machine. This is going to be coming out much later, but the Tom Cruise rant about the COVID-19 protocols on this Mission Impossible set, I understand the passion, and I sort of understand where he's coming from, but it is a job, and
I understand the marketing. I understand the marketing for Tom Cruise.
Oh, yes,
Thank you.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
Everyone remembers his overwhelming heroics saving some kid from getting crushed in a maw of paparazzi. Yep. Good old helpful Tom.
That's right.
Thank you so much.
While the Mission Impossible music plays. But anyway, my point is that William Holden threatened to walk off the set of this movie because of how bad he was treating his crew members. I mean,
I think that that's part of the reason why the shoot went so well. I wanted to say that, by the way, is because William Holden did not put up with a lot of shit. I mean, he actually said, if you speak to a crew member one more time like that, you and I are going to actually fight. So I did want to say that it was full of actors that were not going to put up with that shit. Even
Borgnine wouldn't. I mean, because it's funny because it sounds like he shopped around the role of Pike Bishop to just about everybody. And it's funny, outside of his stable of sort of side characters, he doesn't have a lot of repeat performances. It doesn't seem like, from people. Like, he doesn't get. Like, William Holden's never worked with him again. Ernest Borgnine, I think, showed up in Convoy or something. So it's.
Well, I mean, it's mostly the side characters. So, like, L.Q. Jones and Strother Martin, the two henchmen, who were totally gay, and even Sam Peckinpah said, "Yep, that was my intention, and I loved it. I thought it was awesome."
Okay. Yeah, the two henchmen, the liar.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, it's it was something in the subtext, but you look at them now as kind of a romantically gay couple. A lot of that relationship kind of makes a lot of sense because a lot of that stuff was
from watching it.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff was improv between the two. But like L.Q. Jones is a lot of character actors. It was his mostly band of actors was like James Coburn, Jason.
I know
Robards.
Later it was McQueen.
He only worked with McQueen. Well, he worked with McQueen twice, one after the other, and then after The Getaway, no more, because McQueen, notorious pain in the ass to work with. So and of course Peckinpah was no saint himself to work with. So I mean, Peckinpah. Anyway, I'm just gonna go off on rants again.
Well, you brought up the actors, so I have a question: who in this movie is actually in the Wild Bunch?
So to me, the Wild Bunch are William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Warren Oates, Ben Johnson, and Edmund O'Brien. Those are the Wild Bunch. That's and Angel. And Angel. I can't remember who played Angel. The guy, he was like a TV actor, but that guy. Because
it was Jaime Sanchez.
Thank you.
So my thing is, I would just wonder about that, because you got like Sykes, you got Clarence Crazy Lee, who dies in the first scene. You got Deke Thornton, who I would argue might become a member of the Wild Bunch again after everybody else is dead, because he's invited by Sykes to go. So I'm wondering if it dies at the end, or is this a concept?
Well, here's my thing. I mean, what makes Deke Thornton and his ragtag bunch of bounty hunters not the Wild Bunch? I mean, are they act almost exactly like the Wild Bunch? There's a great shot at the end
just bad
where they're picking over all. It's clear Peckinpah compares them to buzzards. It's clear Peckinpah compared them to vultures. Because I mean, he does it. It's not subtle at the end. I mean, there's vultures all around the dead bodies, and Strother Martin and L.Q. Jones are just picking gold teeth out of corpses. But they're just as much as the Wild Bunch as Pike's band is. So I think there's kind of a gray line there of what is the Wild Bunch. The Wild Bunch, I think, is the era that is ending.
Yeah, I mean, and technically by the end, Sykes and Thornton, and you could debate, I mean, you could also, it would be perfectly reasonable to call the Federales the Wild Bunch.
Sure, exactly, Mapache, absolutely.
But at the end, one of the main differences is Thornton and Sykes are no longer these just outlaws in it for their own interests. They have joined a tangible cause. Because,
well, I mean, it's at the end, right? When Pike lights Mapache up, And they all went in expecting to die. Every single one of them, I love that scene of him coming out of the whorehouse when they're arguing over 2 or 3 pesos.
I wanted to kind of talk about the prelude to that too, because there's a long moment of silence of William Holden kind of getting dressed, and he's listening to his crew member kind of harass the prostitutes, and he notices that there's a little child that this prostitute that he presumably just slept with has, and she's kind of nonchalant about it, and he hands her money, and she seems very strange about it. Like it wasn't like she didn't think she was a really.
Yeah, he overpaid her.
I thought that maybe she wasn't a prostitute.
No. She was most definitely a prostitute. The amount of prostitutes in this movie, the prostitutes that get in the wine that swim around with the Gorch brothers, actual prostitutes.
Can I just briefly say this is something I want to think about going forward? Again, I haven't seen Straw Dogs in many, many, many years, but I obviously remember the fate of the wife, who I'm guessing if I rewatched that movie, I would get the impression that she's sort of an angelic figure.
It's exactly. It's pretty awfully done.
So far, seeing from Peckinpah a very Frank Miller take on women, and I'm curious to see how that evolves. This is definitely his least rapey film, I would say. I think outside of Ballad of Cable Hogue, I think that, and maybe Convoy, I think this was his least rapey film. That fella at the beginning, even when he has the hostages in the station, that was not an actress that he did that to. That was actually a local librarian that Sam Peckinpah told Bo Hopkins to tongue kiss her ear to get that reaction. That's the kind of guy Sam. So when you say Sam Peckinpah wasn't a tyrant, he was more than a tyrant. He was kind of a cult leader. Like to get he did not agree. He was kind of like John Cassavetes, and that he was out to grind you into the performance that he wanted to get out of you. And it wasn't always by giving specific direction, but he was not what you would call a method director, even though like he did a lot of shit that method directors do, so
it's weird, the misogyny. That's a common producer tick that I've noticed.
The misogyny of Sam Peckinpah is something I'm going to be noticing.
And like I said, this is tame. I mean, of Sam. I mean, look, like Sam Peckinpah is one of my favorite directors, but I make no apologies for the guy, especially for the way he portrayed. I mean, I think the most charitable you can be to Sam Peckinpah is that he has a complicated understanding of women. Like he has a complicated relationship with what a man is supposed to be with a woman. And honestly, most of his films, you see that kind of complication and that conflict played out. Often to really terrifying and horrifying results. But yeah, and that is that scene in the wine barrel. That is the most rapey of it. But that, again, those were actual prostitutes. And I think that, but, oh man.
Yeah, I think most of this film actually is pretty outside of the librarian in the start. I think most of these ladies have a fair say in what's going on. Except for the lady who gets shot.
It is when I say the Frank Miller version of women, I mean there is prostitutes, and then there are angelic ladies who get assaulted and raped. And that's about the only kind of women there are.
And even I'd say that Sam Peckinpah's relationship with the women is slightly more nuanced than Frank Miller's and Zack Snyder's. I mean, that's a low bar to clear.
That is a very low bar.
It's like I think that because like even the complication with Angel and his girlfriend when he kills her, it's not that she was like it was more of showing how insane Angel was about the girl, because everyone was telling her, no, dude, because she seemed happy with Mapache. She actually took delight in the way Sam Peckinpah treats it, and this is sort of what I'm talking about, the complicated relationship with women, is that she sort of took this sort of impish, kind of delight at Angel's suffering at watching her kind of, be all over Mapache, and that's a troubling view of women that is revisited in, well, let's just say in Straw Dogs.
Straw Dogs. Straw Dogs is a very uncomfortable thing because it starts out as
boring as shit.
There's a quest. There's a real
Yeah, it takes
there's a
while to
shift
do.
in the center
Angel's
of that scene that's incredibly
in
uncomfortable.
That regard, because he does seem in some ways to be the most moral character. His death is like, obviously, it feels like the kind of thing where his death is like he's the purest of our group and we have to avenge him. He's helping his town, like he is the only one that has like goals outside of himself, but he also is like straight up just shoots a woman for not staying with him.
Right.
Yeah.
So and he has no compunction about, again, blowing shotgun shells into a temperance parade. You know, doesn't even think twice about it, you know?
Yeah, well, and that's even, like, Pike Bishop is such a... and the way Holden plays him is so great because he has no sympathy. I mean, that guy does not care. I mean, and will get angry to imply that you should care. And right from the start, it's the first line he fucking says almost. And it's great. Peckinpah sort of does a one over on you at the beginning where they help a kindly old lady, you know, after like they bump into her and she drops, "Oh, after me, ma'am." Ernest Borgnine's like the chummy, sort of lovable Marty character that he's so good at playing, and then immediately goes into the banks, and if they move, kill them. You know, like it's that's what I think changed it. That's Peckinpah's stamp on the American Westerns, is this completely unsympathetic protagonist that you're going to follow and indeed feel some tenderness towards. You're going to, if not just because his lack of morals, when Peckinpah demonstrates that he at least likes to think that he has a moral, and then that moral is challenged and he's forced to betray it not once, not twice, but thrice. And then he decides that life's not worth living anyway, so I'm going to die by this code. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die by this moral.
Do you guys feel that the Wild Bunch is nihilistic?
I'm glad you kind of asked that, Richard, and it's a wonder why we're twins, because I literally thought the same thing as I'm watching this, that like there's a lot of nihilistic, you know, amoralism that is prevalent throughout this film. But like I said, the reason why it isn't is because of the call to action at the end when they avenge Angel, basically, or go to rescue him. That's what kind of makes it not. So I think yes and no. I don't know. How about that? Cop out?
I think my opinion would be, so we mentioned early in the episode how, in my opinion, the biggest signifiers of technological advancement in the future are used in horrifying ways in this. There's even a brief mention of airplanes and how they plan to use them in the war, which I assume means the brewing World War I. And the storm coming at the end. I honestly think that this movie is like, this era of the world, even though there were amoral people, is done. They had their small-scale weapons and their small-scale goals and their selfish dreams, but ultimately the meat grinder of the 21st century, with its world wars and its holocausts and its horrors, is looming on the horizon. I do think it's a little nihilistic in that sense.
I think I'm going to take the odd man out on this. I don't know if it's totally nihilistic, because the characters essentially are all tied into a selfish notion of what they want to get, but then at the end they actually have to show up and like fight Mapache, and it's potentially revenge and things like that. But it seems like the arc of it is that people will slowly work out the darker parts of their nature once society is introduced. Like as we were kind of getting into it, like the temperance group at the very beginning, they're introduced almost as like a comedy foil in that sequence, because it happens after the turn. Like you introduce the characters and they all look like good guys until you suddenly find out, oh, those are just costumes and these guys are criminals.
Even the machine gun is used in a humorous manner when Mapache's men don't know to put it on a fucking tripod, and it just mows everything down and everybody has to duck or cover, and then they stop it and then they laugh and it's all funny. Ha ha ha, you know.
So I don't know.
Comedy's very strange in this. Comedy in this movie's very strange.
Yeah. Very black comedy. It's very strange.
I guess. I mean, like
but some of the comedy scenes are so broad and goofy. It's almost
yeah. Like they're laughing about, like, you know, I just met a prostitute and now we're getting married. You know, like it is so. But I mean, I you can kind of forgive it because it's done somewhat sparingly, but it does kind of take you out of it. You're all kind of like, well, is an odd note to leave that scene on.
I mean, what the heck else would you do? Like, you gotta, it's a grim ass movie. Like, if you don't have some laughs in there, you're just watching, like, I don't know, you're watching like a Sam Fuller movie, basically.
That's true. I mean, yeah, you do have to have, and you do have to have kind of these moments of levity, just because, you know, you have to kind of like these people, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, and I maintain, obviously, in particular, Lyle tends to be the butt of the joke. Like, when they pass around the drink...
The tequila bottle, yeah.
Specifically avoiding him until it's all gone, and then just laugh at his misfortune. And, I mean, he has a lot of goofy prostitute shenanigans, and doesn't know what tandem means and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, like, you know, especially with women, there's a lot of, like, groping and sort of, like, harassing them as a means of humor.
A lot of drinking and groping. Those are the two main
I didn't say no rape. I just said least rapey. I didn't say there was none. I just said, you know.
But that scene with the bottle, that had to be a true story for Peckinpah. That happened to him, right? And he thought that would be really what a bunch of yucks, and we could throw it in. I don't know if that was
actually in the original screenplay or not. You know, because because Peckinpah he started as a television writer, you know, so he was a writer. But most of the movies he made were already written screenplays that people had purchased and said, "Hey, Sam, do you want to direct this?" And he'd almost always need to get into the screenplay and add that kind of stuff. I don't know if that was in the original screenplay or not.
That felt like knowing Peckinpah's affinity for the sauce.
For sure.
I thought that might have been a true story.
Do you think the comedy in The Devil's Rejects is based off this?
I would say so.
Maybe.
Because there's an entire scene where they go and get ice cream. And it's something in between the characters. Like, they have all these scenes of, like, very mundane emotional connections between people.
They're doing the cat's cradle with the kids.
Yeah. Or even things where it's like the characters are introduced and they challenge each other in ways where you get to know them better by how they don't like each other. Like the fact that, like, Deke hates both of the guys he works with, but he's stuck with them. So it's like you immediately get, at least for me, I remembered every blue-collar job I ever had where I didn't like people, but you show up because it's work and you need the money. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know, it seemed like they introduced a lot of characterization with this through action and things like that. It was really nice.
The dialogue was sparse. I mean, again, you think about that last scene where, you know, I mean, if John Ford or any other typical Western, they would have a whole dialogue scene regarding "Let's go get Angel." You know, they would have a whole back and forth. With Sam Peckinpah, it was just "Let's go."
Even the immediate comparison to this movie is Butch Cassidy the Sundance Kid. That movie's dialogue is wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful dialogue, and it's the thrust of the movie. And they're not really similar. You always get that kind of image in your head that they're similar, and they are similar in that they kind of have a doomed ending, and there's this kind of end of an era about it as well.
But they're similar in a lot of other aspects. I mean, they are based off of the same people, so you're naturally going to get a narrative spine that is going to mirror each other in that, but that's about where it ends. There's like a narrative foundation that they share with Wild Bunch and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, but that's about it.
I also, I mean, to me, much more so than Butch Cassidy, and I mentioned this earlier, but I think Leone's films remind me more of Leone's films than it did of Butch Cassidy.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why, and you guys, one of the reasons that this movie in particular is ranked up there with the Leone flicks in terms of these things were the sort of 1-2 shot that killed the Western. I mean, you think about the Western as a movie making franchise. I mean, we think superhero movies are bad. I mean, back in the day, you could make 10 Westerns in 2 months, you know, including a TV serial if you needed to. I mean, it was everywhere.
Westerns and musicals ran the town for a good while.
Yeah, and Westerns were way preferable to way cheaper people because it was way cheaper to make than those big musicals. Then you have The Wild Bunch coming out the same year as Hello Fucking Dolly.
Which killed the musical.
Which killed the musical and damn near killed Hollywood. And it really, that was the movie that you had The Wild Bunch and Midnight Cowboy and Butch Cassidy and all these other things, and then you had Hello Dolly, which still got all the nominations because Hollywood's gonna Hollywood, then as now.
Sure.
But it's, yeah.
There's a reason Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is set in 1969, I think.
Right, indeed.
Like the end of the old Hollywood system.
Yeah. Indeed.
I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, really? Oh, well, I mean, like...
You haven't seen it yet?
Yeah.
It's fun.
The sheer canyon of shit that Boruff hasn't seen, but that the weird shit that fills that
exactly.
canyon
The movies that
is,
Boruff has seen versus the movies that Boruff hasn't seen makes me sick to my fucking stomach.
I mean,
you know?
It's a constant point.
I mean,
of contention.
it's kind of my brand, guys. It's kind of my brand.
Cool. Well, I
can't wait till we get to Boruff's pick, and he's going to be like, "You said Peckinpah, but what about pecking and pie?"
I guess on that note, we could go through final thoughts.
Sure.
I guess Boruff, why don't you go first, since you never get to go first on final thoughts?
Well, this one was interesting to return to as an adult. When I first saw it when I was younger, I was 19 or 20, so I think that at the time I had just been introduced to the concept of the hero's journey and all that stuff, so the paint by numbers, taking apart every movie thing was still fresh in my head, and I wasn't able to really enjoy the movie properly because I was watching it going, oh, is this the moment when blah 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 happens? Is this the center? Is this the inciting incident and all that? Watching it as an adult, I actually enjoyed it a lot more, but it's because I also appreciate dark characters a lot more than I used to. And it's also, like, I think I understood what was happening better. Because a lot of this stuff, if you don't know why an anti-hero is cool or why it works, it makes these films very confusing. So I thought it was pretty awesome to see that. I still think that while people do talk about the violence in this, it's actually kind of tame in terms
modern
of like
standards. Yeah,
modern standards. Like what you actually see happening is pretty tame. The actions on screen and the meaning behind them is still very harsh and very bracing. So I think it was fascinating. It was a great movie. I'm glad that we got to rewatch it. I am going to be really irritated when I have to do the judgments on this at the end because it kind of was taking the biggest piece off the board first. So I'm going to end this one saying my final thoughts are a little bit fuck Russell. A lot I like the movie pretty well.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Boruff tries to hijack 1 or 2 points away from the Wild Bunch and give it to the Rebels to overthrow my general Amisimo attitude towards this theme. I'll go ahead and finish, and then we'll have
for the rest of the show.
Yeah, right. Like I said, even the movie I won with Dr. Strangelove. I mean, I really spiked the ball with that one. I mean, I did anyway.
Even Powers made fun of you. Even Powers even made that. It's like, if you want to do like a call, I mean, you're not going to do this one because if you want to do Doctor Strangelove, I get.
Yeah. But I'll do my final thoughts since Zach's picking our next movie in the Peckinpah pantheon.
Hey, we'll give Richard a couple minutes too.
Okay, yeah, we can give him a couple minutes if you want. I think I've given him more than enough minutes. But anyway. So let me see. Final thoughts. I can see why this is one of the great westerns. Easily one of the great westerns, if not one of the best American movies ever made. I really do kind of appreciate when you have a movie like this when its theme matches the context of the times. Because even think about the time it was being made in 1969. Violence was becoming more of an everyday thing for most of American society with the Vietnam War and the race riots and what have you. So Peckinpah's kind of punctuating that with this movie, with the brutality of it. The violence is quaint by modern standards. I think like the blood doesn't even. That's it. I mean, like Leonard Maltin even said, like the best part about it, he wanted it to look realistic, and it doesn't look realistic at all. I mean, there's nothing about any of that violence that looks anything real, but it was meant to sort of be jarring and shocking. I also think and when it's also punctuated by a new era in Hollywood as well, and that this movie is one of those hinging points in the studio system that is also disintegrating. And also, this might be one of William Holden's best roles. I mean, obviously, everybody remembers him from Solid 17.
That's a deep field. That's a deep field.
I mean, he's got a lot to work with, but this is one of his best. When
I'm remembering, I believe Network. Network is
Sabrina, Solid 17.
But Solid 17 is if you Jesus, Boruff. You've never seen Solid 17? Really?
I'm just gonna smile at you until you go on.
Okay, whatever. And I think that when I heard that the editor started to notice that William Holden was playing Peckinpah, it is sort of a nice notion about Peckinpah's own life, where he, growing up in the studio system where they were just churning out westerns like cookie cutters, that he's entering a new era that, unlike Bishop and Dutch and the Wild Bunch, he's probably more suited to fit into the new era of Hollywood that's coming up for him. I don't know, because I've barely seen any of his films, but that, knowing what I learned about the Wild Bunch and his method of working, he probably would have been better suited in what's coming up in Hollywood rather than what he had to exist with for most of his career.
Richard, you want to take a couple minutes and then I'll wrap up and do our last pick?
Sure. Yeah. So as Russell said, and as I've told everyone who will listen to me, it's one of my favorite films of all time. It is to me, one of my favorite quotes about the movie is one of the costume designers went to a screening of the Sam Peckinpah cut of it before they took, because originally the cut that no longer exists that eventually came out was missing the 2 flashback sequences, which, imagine that. It's any reason why Sam Peckinpah viewed that producer as just a blood enemy after that point, because it kind of took out the heart of the movie. But it's what Sam Peckinpah, when he showed it to his costume director, he went to at the end of it, he was shaking his hand, and Sam Peckinpah just said to him, "Now they know what killing means." And the reason why I say that is because the reason why I still say the violence is still stark is not necessarily what happens. The little juice coming out of him, that's not what makes it jarring. It's the way that Sam Peckinpah presents it and the way that he treats it seriously. When it was apparently a lot more violent in the dailies, when they put together the assembly talk, I mean, we're talking heads coming off and arms and everything of that nature. And when they put it together, they found that the audience was laughing. And that's not what Sam Peckinpah wanted. So he really walked the line of trying to show this, trying to make it as jarring as possible. And that's why I think the violence still kind of sticks with me. It's not necessarily what happens, it's the way that it's presented. And it became that sort of mentality that ultimately defined and really ultimately destroyed Sam Peckinpah's career, was having to be this violent, bloody thing when he did it as a point. I wanted to bring up one other thing. He was talking in an interview. Apparently, there was a French correspondent in the middle of the Vietnam War who had quoted a soldier who had said that he was thinking of himself as Pike, Bishop, and the Wild Bunch when he was going massacring civilians in Vietnam. And Sam Peckinpah replied to that as, first of all, not like trying to say, well, that's a thing or whatever. He said, yeah, I read that, and he said, I believed in the theory of catharsis, that once we purge ourselves of this violence, once we see this violence, we'll suddenly be cured from it. And hearing that makes everything that I tried to do with the Wild Bunch mean nothing.
Ouch.
And so it's amazing why the guy, I mean, it's any wonder why the guy was a drinker, because he ultimately saw what he was trying to say is becoming his ultimate creation of destruction and feeding into the bloodlust of Hollywood. But to me, it still stands up today because of that kind of harshness and everything of that nature. I don't know. It ages perfectly. It's almost 50. It's over 51. It's like 51 years old. And to me, it still stands up as against any action movie you put it against. So thanks for having me on. I love it.
Yeah, I guess I'll be semi-short. I don't think I have much to add to the collection of thoughts that have already come. Definitely, I'll say, as a genre, Westerns are not one that I have paddled deeply into. I've seen some of the bigger name ones. I've seen like the original True Grit. I have seen The Searchers. I've seen like Leon's No Name trilogy and Once Upon a Time in the West. I've seen a couple of the other like earlier ones, but that kind of hokum 50s great romanticized style of Western is just not very appealing to me, and this is much more so. So I am relieved of that at the very least.
Did it?
Yeah, I think it's a very solid. I understand why it has a revered place in the Western genre, a movie about eras ending and changing that is, has this fortuitous coincidence with a change in kind of both America and the Hollywood system in the late 60s, early 70s. Yeah, I understand why it's like it's a relic of its time in many ways that like captures this moment in history, not just the period it takes place, but the period it was created, which is fascinating. And it's well worth seeing. But I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay.
And going to go ahead and
before you get out your piece, before we let everybody go, let's just handle the business and just do a little bit of house cleaning. So as of now, Chris has 3 points to give and 10 points allocated to voting. I've got 3 points to give and Zach has 3 points to give. However, Richard has 2 points to give because he gave 1 point to Zach for Omar
We're always
the Wire.
stingy in the first episode.
Referencing the wire. Referencing the wire.
And rarely does the first movie win. So if that's any consolation, that's why
I think it's too early to create a pattern. We've only got like 4 rounds.
That's true.
It's like I was thinking about this, guys. Peckinpah. This is one of those directors where there is I know there is some debate, but this isn't like the Coens or even Spielberg or anything of that nature where like there's a lot of things that can be considered his best, but like The Wild Bunch is almost universally considered Peckinpah's greatest film, and so for Russell to take it off the board, dick move, bro, dick move.
I know. It was. So anyway, as the final count, as we got for when we finish the Peckinpah Pantheon, Boruff has 10 points, Zach has 11, and Russell has 10 points. So, Zach Powers, what are we watching next time?
Yeah, so this was interesting because this is the first time in this show's history where like I get a topic where I get to choose something and I can look literally at every possible choice because there's a limited number of possible choices. Like never before has that been an option to me. So I thought about it and I read some stuff and again, I've only seen Straw Dogs before, so I don't have a great pre-knowledge of any of these films. But ultimately, the one that I felt seemed like maybe in the past few years has been getting like a consensus as like maybe the dark horse for his actual masterwork that I've seen bandied about. I think there's a few contenders for that, but the one that I saw the most, I feel like, was Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia.
Richard just literally punched the air.
I fucking love that movie.
Literally just punched the air.
Oh my goodness.
What the hell am I gonna pick now, guys?
Quiero la cabeza de Alfredo Garcia. What a fucking title for a movie, right? Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia.
Yeah. So that'll be what we watch next time.
Okay. Alrighty. Cool. That is a killer title. I mean, that is a cool title.
It's a rough movie.
We're gonna find out. Thank you, Richard, for being on the show. We've wanted to have you on, I believe, since we did the first version of the film Concussion way back in the day. So it was nice to have you on today. And if anybody at home could leave a comment about whether you could tell which one was which when they were speaking, that would be entertaining to everyone involved.
Yes.
Maybe we'll see you next time, Richard. Maybe not. We'll see if that works out or not. We'll just play it by ear.
Yeah, we'll play it by ear. But Richard as our resident Peckinpah scholar, so to speak. And yeah, he probably will show up because I know when I bandied about the Peckinpah theme, this is the movie that he mentioned that I should do instead of The Wild Bunch. So, so I know Richard's really excited.
I'm stoked to see what you guys think of this movie.
Well, thanks again, Richard, for showing up on the Movie Trap, and we will see you guys next time for the Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia.
All right, see everybody next time.
Put it on the tripod.